Welcome to another exciting episode of the Business of Digital podcast, featuring your hosts, Matt Siltala and Dave Rohr. Hey everybody, Matt Siltala here alongside Dave Rohr. We appreciate you guys joining us on this, the latest edition of our Business of Digital podcast. And today we actually have a special guest. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Days. Thank you for joining us today, Frank.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
And so we do have Dave over there. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
But what I wanted to do, maybe just give you a few minutes. Frank, go ahead and introduce yourself, and where we can find you online and listen to you. You do have a podcast as well, and just kind of introduce yourself, and then let's jump into this.
Sure. I guess because we tend to define ourselves by what we do rather than who we are. My day job is I lead a team of marketers here at a company called Enterprise DB. We are the leading open source database, most complete open source data platform is our tagline, strapline. We are the leading provider of database, enterprise class database based on the open source platform called Postgres. If you're ever in the database industry, Postgres is the number 4 most popular database in the world after Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server. We sell a commercial version. I've been in open source software for the last 5+ years, and I spent most of my career, at least most of the last 20 years, as the CMO of a series of venture-funded software companies. I've had 2 exits in the last 5 years. I wish they were big enough exits that I didn't need to work anymore, but here I am still working. My background, as we lead the conversation today, a segue over to the topic of agile marketing or agile for marketing or just agile in general. The history on that for me is that I've always managed more often than not in startup environments where marketing plans had a very short shelf life. And I kind of came to Agile in a funny way where one time we were doing a project, and actually we were in the midst of, I was in a company that was growing like 50% a year, and we would go through these regular cycles with our CEO where he would say hiring is no excuse for not growing. We need to fill in all these 12 open spots in the next month. And he would say, we're going to meet every morning for 15 minutes, and you're going to tell me what you did yesterday and what you're going to do today and what's getting in the way of you getting things done. And then I got to managing my marketing teams kind of that way because I hated marketing plans. And again, they had no shelf life. And then it was funny. I had a conversation with a developer friend of mine, and we got talking, and I realized, hey, that approach isn't unique. It's not new. It's not fresh. It's actually something that developers call agile. And it's an approach that they've used for years and years and years.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sorry, Dave, were you going to?
I was just going to say, so agile is basically no plan.
Well, it's interesting. It's not the lack of a plan. It's a methodology for planning your work and managing your work. So it's rather than the contrast. The two kind of common paradigms are waterfall, which is a more traditional approach, which many people are familiar with. You write a plan, and then you execute against the plan. So if you were a product developer, you would do things like create a market requirements document, which I'll admit I've created versions of that in my recent history because I'm currently doing a lot of product marketing these days. And then you create a product requirements document, and then you go and turn that into a specific technical spec and then features, and then you build it. And the problem you run into in waterfall land is that might take you 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months from that market requirements, the initial requirements of what you think, versus when you launch the product. And of course, along the way, you learn things and you discover things that maybe didn't hold up against your initial assumptions. And what do you then do? Do you stick to your original specification, or do you change and learn and adapt? And really, that's a lot of where Agile comes from. The idea that you have a major release every 9 to 12 months. That's 20-year-old thinking. It's very kind of old-fashioned thinking. Nowadays, it's really more about in an agile mode, you plan your work in short bursts of time. They're often referred to as sprints. People will do sprints anywhere in the duration of, say, a week or up to maybe a month. And then you meet pretty regularly, have short status meetings, whether it's, in development teams, often once a day. My team, we meet 3 times a week for 15 minutes. At those meetings, they're just very fast status meetings to discuss anything that's going on, and if there are any blockers, any impediments, or do we need help from anyone. The cool thing about it is it's very, very low overhead. There's no marketing plan left anymore. We use a platform called Jira, which is by this company, a very successful SaaS company called Atlassian. They have a series of products really designed for software developers. And I think the benefits being it's a very low overhead approach to planning, which people who are very productive really like. And it just really moves fast, and I think
it made me think of a question while you're talking about this, because Dave and I just got done recording a podcast session on leadership, and so what does leadership, what does the leadership roles look like in Agile marketing, and how does who's the leader, and how does that all play, and how does it work with the teams?
Well, it's an interesting thing because we've had formalized Agile training here in my company. We brought in a third party who came in this group has the godfather of Scrum, which is one Agile approach, and they came in and were talking about if you're using an Agile approach, there are a couple of key roles in the team, and one of them is the person who is called the product owner. So in the idea in an Agile product development team is that the product owner is someone who speaks for the customer. So they articulate the need, they try to represent the customer and the customer's needs and what the market needs. And then the second important role on the team is the Scrum Master. So this is the person who kind of manages the backlog of work and the tasks and runs the Scrum, in the case of us, runs the Scrum meeting and is a facilitator of the process. They're not managers. And same thing with product owner. The product owner is not always the manager of the person. So I'll give you an example. My team, we call it the go-to-market team, not the marketing team, because our team has, my team, which is product marketing, content, PR, AR, a bunch of them, everything except for international field marketing, sales enablement, and product management are not. But those are all parts of the go-to-market process for us. So, but all those other teams send representatives to this group. So coincidentally, I'm the product owner for the group, and about half of the people in this group report to me and half don't. So it's not uncommon in an Agile environment for the manager to totally be out of the process.
Oh, wow.
So the idea being that an Agile team is accountable to itself rather than to the boss. It's
Gotcha.
Really more about building a team that's self-directed, self-managed, and motivated, and accountable to each other rather than to the Scrum Master.
That seems
or the
awesome.
product owner.
It just seems like it flows so much better that way.
Well, I think it's it's not a brand new idea. I think the idea of Agile, you can go back to the Agile Manifesto, which is a very well-defined thing you can find online, and people have been trying to do this for 20 plus years. So the ideas are not really brand new. I mean, I go back to when I finished my undergraduate education and was working in the early 90s. We were talking about self-directed and self-managed teams back then. And, rather than the manager delegating you tasks, you know what the workload is, and you playing your work as a team and delegate, and you divvy up the work yourself. Well, those are core principles of Agile, and they're not new and fresh and unique. But I guess in the marketing world, and this is, I'm going to be a bit snarky about it here, but the idea of Agile marketing, well, there's Agile, and that means a very specific set of things. Marketers, we've adapted a bunch of these approaches for use in marketing, but the fact of the matter is Agile is Agile is Agile. I mean, it just is. It's a thing. It's not because we put marketing after it, we have defined something that's unique and special and different. Now, how marketers are using Agile can be quite different from the way that developers are using it. The specific rituals and techniques and technologies and approaches, because, I'll give you a key example. if you're using Agile, let's say in a software development world or an environment where you're deploying code, I'll give you an example. Say you are a SaaS website. Your product is a SaaS product. Well, in an Agile environment, a couple of the key Agile product development environment, a couple of the key rituals are at the end of a given sprint, a 1 week or a 2 week, let's just say you deploy once a week. At the end of that 1 week, you do a demo. And then at the end of that sprint, once the demo is completed, people will often deploy that code live. Well, in marketing, everyone doesn't work on the same thing. We don't all work on the same data sheet all at the same time. We don't all work on our product in marketing is not a uniform thing that we're all working on. We're not all working on the same subsystem of code that goes into a bigger application. So it doesn't always work exactly the same way. So in my group, we've got probably 15 or 20 different projects going at any instant in time. So at the end of our 2 week sprint, we can't say, okay, everything ships. We integrate everything and ship it the way a product developer would.
Yeah, I've been on. I wouldn't say it was truly agile, but it was probably half-arse attempts at various stages of my career, where we did sprints for code, and we actually were doing probably more true agile stuff, where we had to package up all the bug fixes and every week, and then we were doing pushes. Yeah. But I've also done it where I was on the SEO side, and we had sprints every week. I worked with a really large Fortune probably 50 or 100 company, and we were redoing their website. So every week we had a sprint where we had to go through and do X number of pages for meta descriptions, page titles, analyze the content. The internal writers would have to look at it, and then we'd send it off to legal, because we had 7 months to get approval from 5 different levels and 40 different lawyers and have everything approved in 6 months. And so we had to break it up, and every week we were just pounding and digging through this stuff.
Well, it's interesting. We interviewed a good friend of mine about 6 months ago, or I guess it was probably closer to a year ago, and he worked in a large agency, and he was working with telecom clients and financial services clients, and he had a lot of those same, often public companies, and had a lot of those same constraints around infinite legal reviews and many stakeholders. And one of the things they did, which I thought was very interesting, is they would try to get a representative from the legal process into either their product development, creative development, or into their Scrum process. So that's another approach that people are taking to try and get around the serial approach to creating things, that I create it and then I throw it over the wall, then they do it and they throw it back over the wall, which is more of the traditional waterfall. I do this, then you do that, and I do this, versus everyone working together as a group and having greater transparency over what tasks people are working on, and then being able to collaborate in a much more effective way.
Well, for that project with the Fortune 100, there was dedicated legal people that knew every week that they were going to be getting anywhere from 5 to 20 hours worth of reading and stuff to go through. And there was some people on scrums from them. There was multiple scrums I think there was a scrum every day. We were on a couple from the agency side. Great. And there was product. There was so many people on all these different meetings. I mean, this was crazy orchestrated at a thousands of people involved level. It was insane and ridiculous and really cool.
Yeah, and this unfortunately that's the challenge that companies go through as they get bigger as well. How do you balance the need for compliance and approvals versus the demands for agility? It's interesting because I'd spent the better part of the last decade working in venture funded startups, and where I was the CMO, and we would have a team of anywhere from 2 to say 6 people, and the approval process would be show it to my CEO or show it to my head of sales, and then we're off to the races. Well, I did a consulting project last year with a telecom company where I was playing CMO, part-time CMO, and it was shocking the number of steps in the approval process, and that's just the nature of the way things are in bigger companies. Bigger companies are just more risk averse, and because one mistake could be your job, and the incentives are all towards making zero mistakes. Whereas in a startup, you're in an environment where you're going to make lots of mistakes, and that's just the nature of the beast. And that's okay, because the point is make the mistakes and use the old cliche, fail fast and learn and adjust and move. It's kind of interesting where I am now today. We're a 300 person company, and
oh wow,
and we're a 14-year-old company, so it's a little different setup, but still a CEO who's got very entrepreneurial attitude about things, and we have approvals. Look, I still pass things by my general counsel, because that certain things, when we're saying things at scale to a broader audience, we're trying to be safe about things. I don't want to say anything that might cause problems. But he's super responsive. He moves fast, and we align with him. And I don't know the easy answer on any of this stuff, but the easy answer to me is, well, you don't need as many approvals. But it's easy to say. I mean, a lot of these companies get to where they are with all these approvals through years and years and years and years and years of process and bureaucracy, and until the giant storm comes and knocks everything over, or private equity comes and gets rid of 80% of the marketing team, nothing's really going to change.
So I'm just trying to think of problems that someone could face while either working with or trying to implement Agile. And one of them would probably be legal or approvals. The other one would be, I think I've worked with Jira and I've worked with some startups in the past as a consultant, and I thought it was actually kind of cool. I haven't done it a lot, but I can totally see the idea behind it. What would you say that if someone hasn't worked with Jira and is looking to kind of dig into it, what should they think about?
I think it's not so much about the tools anyways. This is a conversation. We had a guest on our podcast recently from IBM, and he was saying, and I couldn't agree with him more. To me, Agile is not about the tools. I mean, for years, I've run my Agile process through a Google Docs spreadsheet. I mean, you don't need, the tools are helpful from a workflow standpoint. For example, I put it, one of my head of content, she does a great job of taking assets and breaking down into its smallest elements and creating subtasks and then divvying them up, and then when something the first draft is done, tagging me in the comments, so it gets sent over to me, and then I go and with the link to the Google Doc in it, and then I can review it, and then I tag her back, and some of that workflow stuff has some real benefit. But the truth of the matter is that if you go in an Agile approach, to me, that if you have the singular backlog, the singular transparent backlog, you work in a week or 2 week sprints, and you prioritize your backlog pretty carefully, and you scrum on a regular basis, you're going to get 90+% of the value of using an Agile approach. I know that's heresy, because I've heard the more purists who are out selling Agile for a living, they call that Scrum butt. We're doing Scrum butt. We're not doing Agile, because you're not going to get all the value. You're not going to squeeze every last drop of juice out of the orange. But from my experiences and from most of the marketers I've talked to, they don't do all the rituals. It's just, as a marketer, it's very, very difficult, and the overhead is just too great.
Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's ever been a podcast where we haven't say you should follow best practices, except when they don't work for you.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, and
best practices is kind of an idea, and you should look at it and then do whatever works for you.
And it just comes back to trade-offs, right? I mean, that's, in the end of the day, the best practices may be best practices, but I sort of feel like benchmarks. I wrote a blog post a number of years ago as a snarky response to one of our marketing leaders in a company I work for, because I kind of felt like benchmarks are for losers, because benchmarks are averages.
Which, by the way, that sounds like a title of a good book. Benchmarks are for losers.
Yeah, they are, and it was a blog post. It's not. I don't know. I could have written a whole book on it, but the whole point is that you can't, if you're measuring yourself against averages or even quartiles or whatever. I mean, shouldn't you as a marketer be looking to continuously improve what you're doing and try to be the leader, to try to be the best you can be? Sure, it's nice to know at a rough level what industry numbers are. Should I know, like on my website, I should be, I should know at a rough level anywhere from 2 to 3% from traffic to lead kind of conversion rate. Okay. That's great to know that, whether I'm just completely out of line. But if you're fully optimizing your process, whether it be paid search, organic search, on-site optimization, whatever you're trying to optimize, benchmarks are good as a starting point for the conversation, but you want to be the benchmark. You want to be the world-class leader in whatever you do, not be following what others are saying you should be at.
Yeah, that's great. So, sorry, Dave, did you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I was just thinking of maybe, Frank, do you have any resources other than what your podcast is? Because you guys talk about this quite often. Is there any other, you talked about the Agile Manifesto. Is there anything else that you would say someone
there's a couple things out there. The one that I'd recommend, obviously, if you're interested in hearing what people are doing as they're trying to figure out Agile in their marketing teams, Marketing Agility Podcast is our podcast with my colleague Roland Smart. He has a book on Wiley Press, The Agile Marketer, which I also highly recommend. I mean, I think he does a really nice job in a very practical way to kind of links the changing customer experience and why that sort of necessitates a new marketing management model. And then he does a nice job of kind of talking about the different approaches that people use, because Agile's not, there's a bunch of techniques that are kind of around Agile, including Kanban and Scrumban, and there's a whole bunch of things that people are trying to do. The dominant design is not fully emerged for the way that people are using Agile in marketing, regardless of what people will say. And you can also check out, our podcast is listed at agilemarketingblog.com. So some great places that you can check out things.
And just to remind everybody that's listening, we will have links to all this on the blog post that's, in the write-up for this episode. So don't worry about that, guys.
Especially if you're driving.
Especially if you're driving, exactly. All right. Well, Frank, I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us and talking about Agile marketing. This has been super informative, and hopefully all of our listeners have gained something from this. So thanks again.
Oh, well, thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, guys, for Frank and Dave, I'm Matt, and we will see you on the next one of these Business of Digital podcasts. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks.